Subtle idolatry. Even when we have a strong desire to walk in God's will, we must still be careful not to allow any form of idolatry to creep into our lives. Here now is Gene.
The key phrase in this principle is any form of idolatry. Any form of idolatry. And of course, Solomon, as we'll see in the passage, began to violate this principle. It began to happen when he violated God's law and married Pharaoh's daughter, who was an Egyptian princess and obviously a pagan. She did not believe in Yahweh, the God of Israel. And that was one of the first steps that began his downfall. 1 Kings 3, 1-3. Solomon made an alliance with Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And of course, when this kind of stuff happens in these biblical settings, we have to really understand all the dynamics of the culture and being kings and relating to other kings and alliances, and all of this was very common stuff. In this case, Solomon made an alliance with Pharaoh, king of Egypt, by marrying Pharaoh's daughter. Those kinds of arrangements were very common in the culture. Solomon brought her to live in the city of David until he finished building his palace, the Lord's temple, and the wall surrounding Jerusalem. However, the people were sacrificing on the high places. Now, the high places, nothing wrong with high places. But the fact of the matter is, that's where the pagans had their altars. And they believed that if you were on high places, the higher you could get on hills or mountains, the closer you got to these deities. And what happened is that Israel began to sacrifice on high places, because until that time a temple for the Lord's name had not been built. And that was serious, because it's going to lead to sin in their lives. And later we'll talk about idolatry. But notice, this is a fascinating statement. Solomon loved the Lord by walking in the statutes of his father David. And here, his love for the Lord related to obedience. I don't think it was great affection particularly, but he obeyed to a certain extent, walking in the statutes of his father David. But, notice, he also sacrificed and burned incense on the high places. There was a step in the wrong direction, which led then to idolatry. And what we frequently say when we look at what's happening in Israel, what happened in Israel and what's happening even in Christian religion today, is that this, what Solomon did, led to, it opened a crack, as it were, to what we call syncretism. Religious syncretism. And there's a principle from the book of Judges. Let me share it with you. And that is that we must be extremely cautious that we never combine pagan concepts with true biblical values. And that's what Solomon began to do. And this is based in the book of Judges on a story of a man, an Israelite named Micah. And he had false gods in his home. And there was a young guy who was traveling, who was really from the tribe of Levi. Now, it's interesting in this context, in this story, it says that there was no king in Israel and everybody did what was right in his own eyes. That was this period of history in the book of Judges. And so this young man stops at Micah's home. And Micah finds out this young man is a Levite. And he's excited about that because he said, hey, you come in and I'll ordain you as a priest, because the priests had to be Levites. So he ordained him as a priest in his house in worshiping God and worshiping idols. That's what you call syncretism. And that happened in Israel again and again. It happened when they were at Mount Sinai receiving the law. When Moses was up in the mountain receiving the laws, and Aaron succumbed and took gold and made a golden calf. And the interesting thing is, they weren't worshiping this golden calf separate from worshiping God. They wanted an idol representing God, like the Egyptians had, in order to lead them. And of course, that was all tied in with all kinds of paganism as they worshiped this golden calf. So here you see syncretism creeping into their lives because they had been living in this pagan culture. And so it was very easy for them to slide into this mixing, this pagan religion, with what they were learning about God. I've seen this happen. I've seen it happen in countries where I remember in one situation involving a church, and the priests were out in the courtyard doing Mass. Now, I saw this with my own eyes, and the witch doctors were in the church offering their incantation to the statuary that were in the church. And that is taking Christianity and integrating it with false idols and paganism. This has happened all over the world in terms of Christianity. If we're not careful, we can combine this. It's a form of idolatry. Well, you know what happened to Solomon. His eventual demise was hastened when he violated another commandment of God. He multiplied foreign wives and concubines who were devoted to these false gods. 1 Kings 11:4. When Solomon was old, what happened? His wives seduced him to follow other gods. He was not completely devoted to Yahweh, his God, as his father David had been. Here we see that crack was opened, and it just got wider and wider and wider, and he was led into horrible idolatry, which led ultimately to his downfall. I think today we need to ask ourselves a question, that is, what is an idolatrous activity? Well, it's really anything that becomes more important than God himself. That can be idolatry. Anything that becomes more important than God himself. In 1 John, we have a warning from John the Apostle. Little children, guard yourselves from idols. Now, it was true that in that culture, idols were everywhere, and they had to be really on guard that they didn't fall in this trap of syncretism. But the fact is, that statement is to us today too. Little children, guard yourselves from idols. So the question I think we need to think about is, what are some of the things in our culture that are not wrong in themselves, but that can begin to take the place of God in our lives? Well, Jesus warned us, Matthew 6:33, but seek first the kingdom of God. That's a key. That's a very important key in avoiding idolatry. But seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be provided for you. These things can apply to lots of things in this world. Good things. Many good things that have come from the hand of God can lead us into idolatry. Now, first of all, we can say these things relate to money, material things. But it's not money per se. It's not the material things per se. That can be a real blessing from God. We need it to live. But the fact of the matter is, the Apostle Paul warned that the love of money, not money, but the love of money is the root of all evil. So, material possessions can certainly become an idol. But it's more than money. It can be the car we drive, the house we live in, our job per se, even this wonderful job if we're not careful, even being in the ministry can become an idol if it becomes more important than the God that we're serving. And we all have to be on guard against that. Our family, our kids, our spouses. Now, I've had to pray, Lord, I really love these children. I love these grandchildren. but I want them to be more important than my love for you. And that's a very important balance, isn't it? So it's easy to slip and step over that line. We can say the same thing about entertainment. You know, entertainment is great. We need refreshment. We need time away. We need a change of venue. But if we're not careful, that can take the place of God himself. We have to be very, very careful of it, of all of this. And that's why Matthew did say that we are to seek first his kingdom, his righteousness. And all these things will be provided for you as well. In other words, it's a matter of priority. So, let me conclude by restating that principle, which I've called subtle idolatry. Even when we have a strong desire to walk in God's will, we must still be careful not to allow any form of idolatry to creep into our lives.